Hi everyone. Thank you for joining week 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals for Business series, and welcome to today's seminar. My name is Joe Quincy and I will be your MC for today's talk on SDG 4, Quality Education. I'm Chief Executive for DCU's Educational Trust, the philanthropic arm of DCU. SDG 4B is a free online seminar that explores the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how these are impacting businesses. As I'm sure you're aware, the 17 interlinked goals were developed to provide a blueprint to a better and more sustainable future for all. Today, we're looking at SDG 4, Quality Education, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. We're delighted today to be joined by Dr. Therese Ferguson and Dr. Carmel Roofe of the University of the West Indies. Both Dr. Ferguson and Dr. Roofe will be discussing the role of higher education in the realisation of SDG 4. Just a couple of words on both doctors. Dr. Ferguson is a lecturer in Education for Sustainable Development in the School of Education at the University of the West Indies. That's based in Jamaica. Dr. Ferguson is the coordinator of the ESD working group within the School of Education and serves as program coordinator for the Master of Education degree program in Education for Sustainable Development, Global Citizenship and Peace within the School of Education. That is quite a qualification and quite a title. Dr. Roofe is a senior lecturer in curriculum and instruction in the School of Education at the University of the West Indies, where she is the program coordinator for master's and doctoral programs in curriculum studies. Dr. Roofe is also a member of the ESD working group. She has a long and distinguished career in secondary teaching and teaching initial and in-service teachers in the higher level space. So I'd like to hand over to Dr. Ferguson and Dr. Roofe in a minute. Just a word on the Q&A function. The chat function will be off today, but please use the Q&A function to ask any questions you may have during the seminar. And you'll find that at the bottom of the screen. We'll compile as many of these and hopefully we'll get to as many questions as we can in the context of the time that's allowed. So without further delay, I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Ferguson and Dr. Roofe for the balance of the seminar. Thank you.
Good morning from Jamaica, everyone, and good afternoon in your time zone. Thank you for inviting us to share with you today. The title of our presentation is The Role of Higher Education in the Realization of Sustainable Development Goal 4, a case study, and my colleague and I will be sharing with you. All right, so just to give you an idea in terms of what we will be sharing with you today, we're going to be providing a brief introduction to set the context for our case study. So we will share an overview of Sustainable Development Goal 4, and I will just refer to it as SDG 4 from here on in. We'll take a look at SDG 4 and higher education, how the two connect. We will share some opportunities for SDG 4 in higher education, as well as some challenges that higher education institutions face in achieving SDG 4. We will then share our case study looking at the University of the West Indies School of Education and SDG 4. We will propose a framework for higher education institutions in achieving SDG 4, and our case study will of course relate to that framework. And then we will conclude. All right, so sustainable development is, as we all know, a framework for people, planet, and prosperity. It is this holistic view that sees sustainable development and the interlinkages between social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and economic well-being. And as a result, the world community in 2015 adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This was adopted by all United Nations member states in this effort to reconcile economic prosperity and well-being with environmental sustainability and social inclusion. and they are actionable through the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And these goals, they speak to the environmental, social, economic, and governance elements of sustainable development. Now, higher education institutions have a critical role to play in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so this works in a variety of means and mechanisms. So firstly, they have a charge to integrate sustainability, all dimensions of sustainability, into the curricula, management, and operational systems, as well as community outreach. They have a charge to serve as models for sustainability, models for the campus community, the surrounding communities in which they are situated, as well as for the wider society. They have a charge to innovate and problem solve, because we know that the sustainability issues that we face today are extremely challenging, many of them so-called wicked problems, such as climate change. And they have a charge to foster competencies for sustainable development amongst the student bodies and communities which they serve. So an overview of Sustainable Development Goal 4. So this goal serves to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. It is meant to have 7 targets and 3 means of implementation. And I'll share more about the targets in a few moments. Sustainable Development Goal 4 is critical as a goal in and of itself. So education, quality education, is critical to the achievement of sustainable development. In addition, though, it's also critical for the achievement of the other SDGs, which are dependent upon and linked to education. And we know that successful implementation of SDG 4 is dependent upon various entities and stakeholders, including higher education institutions. So our 7 outcome targets. So we have target 4.1, which seeks to ensure that girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education. We have outcome target 4.2, which seeks to ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development education. Target 4.3, so this is focused on ensuring equal access across the genders to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, which includes university. Target 4.4, which seeks to increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills for employment, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Target 4.5 seeks to eliminate the gender disparities that may exist in education and ensure equal access for men and women, as well as persons who may be vulnerable, for instance, persons with disabilities. Target 4.6 seeks to ensure that youth as well as adults achieve literacy and numeracy. And then target 4.7, critical. So ensuring that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. So these 7 outcome targets are critical, and we will show when we go into our case study how our own institution, particularly the School of Education, seeks to work across those 7 targets. So SDG 4 in higher education, the role of these higher education institutions. Well, we know for targets 4.1 through to 4.6, these higher education institutions have a critical role to play. So firstly, they have to deliver quality teacher training, because these are the same teachers, the same individuals who will filter into our classrooms at all levels, from pre-primary to elementary to secondary through to tertiary education. These higher education institutions have to strengthen program delivery for capacity building, and they also have to enhance the diversity of programs that they offer, again, to ensure a broad disciplinary reach and the capability to tackle these different challenges within the education sector as well as outside. And they have to offer programs through various modalities, because the idea is that we need to increase access for all groups. So this is your face-to-face, your online, your blended modalities. What about target 4.7 in particular? So again, higher education institutions have a critical role to play with respect to integrating sustainable development into curricula. And we cannot emphasize enough that this has to be curricula that is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. So it has to cut across all of the various disciplines. These institutions must engage in research. It is this research that will provide data, that will provide evidence, and that will provide possible solutions for the sustainability issues that we face. The institutions must green their campuses. So thinking about their water, waste management, energy systems, and how those can align with sustainability. And they have to support sustainability efforts in their communities. And the examples of HESI, the Higher Education Sustainability Initiative, which came into being 2012 and represents this commitment from over 300 universities from across the world, is one example. And the Copernicus Alliance is a second example. So this European network of higher education for sustainable development. So I now turn over to my colleague.
Thank you, Therese. So as we seek to achieve these SDG 4 targets, we know that within higher education institutions reside opportunities for achievement. And an overarching opportunity is for higher education institutions to have a targeted approach towards sustainability ideals. And this, of course, includes clarifying what sustainable development means and clarifying what is higher education institutions' role in achieving sustainable development. We argue that this involves deciphering sustainability literacy of both staff and students. We see another opportunity in the use of SDG 4 progress data to identify areas for training and offer these where possible. When we look at the UNESCO report, a 2019 report, there's an indication that there are many areas that are needed for training. So we have many training gaps existing. And we believe that higher education institutions have a role in this. For example, from where we sit, when we think of teacher education, there's a need for increased number of teachers from early childhood and primary level across the world. So there's an opportunity there for teacher education. We also see opportunity in higher education institutions being able to build and lead partnerships and networks across borders. And these partnerships we see could contribute to research and skills development, especially when we think about the nature of higher education institutions, where higher education institutions are charged with the responsibility to prepare persons to innovate and to problem solve. Another opportunity that we see resides in the nature of higher education with its diversity. So higher education institutions can capitalize on the diversity to teach knowledge and skills and values associated with SDG 4 through what we consider to be multiracial, multicultural, and multinational lenses. So while we know that there are these wonderful opportunities for SDG 4 in higher education, we also know that there are some challenges to the sector. And these challenges, we argue, are linked to the sector's understanding of its role in achieving the SDG goals, while others are linked to just the ways in which higher education institutions are organized in different countries. So a challenge, we'll pinpoint a couple of challenges here. Of course, the list is not exhaustive. So one of the challenges we see is for the sector to widen its involvement, to include persons who are at the lower levels of the system. For example, to work with persons who are at primary education, early childhood education, secondary education, technical vocational education, and to work with persons who are outside of higher education. And this we see as a challenge because the report indicates that higher education institutions have a tradition of operating in silos to conduct research, to innovate, and to problem solve as they see fit. And so the challenge with this many times is that the research is sometimes divorced from the needs of the wider society. So there's an opportunity residing within this challenge that the sector needs to involve more stakeholders in what it does. Another challenge for the sector, when we look at UNESCO 2017 report, which says that higher education gross enrollment ratio ranges from an average of 8% in sub-Saharan Africa to 75% in Europe and North America. This is suggesting a widening of disparities across country contexts and continents. So the sector is being challenged to increase the offering and access to enrollment across country contexts. Another challenge we see is what I'm terming a gender challenge. And this gender challenge plays out in different ways. And we'll talk about just two this morning and this afternoon. So we see where OECD 2018 reported that 15 to 24-year-old young men are at least 40% more likely than young women to enroll in vocational education. Now, this has implications for the quality of jobs that women will get and the level of employment within the society. Another aspect of the gender challenge resides in the fact that for those men and women who enter higher education institutions, women are more likely to complete and graduate than men. So we see where the sector is being challenged here to include support mechanisms for men, and for all students who enter higher education institutions. And then the last challenge that we'll mention is the funding crisis. And we are so aware of this funding crisis in the sector, where we're having budgetary constraints. Budgets are decreasing, leading to what we now call the marketization of education, where higher education institutions are poised or charged with the responsibility to increase enrollment. So as a result of this increasing in enrollment, we see class sizes getting larger. And this, of course, poses a threat to teaching quality. We also see where funding is more available in developed countries than developing countries. And so this may create, and indicate the kinds of opportunities that higher education institutions within developing countries can undertake versus those that are in developed countries. And so again, we talk about the partnership that is necessary to help improve some of the situations. So I'll hand back to Therese, who will take us through the case study.
Thank you, Carmel. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the University of the West Indies and the Caribbean region, we'll just share a bit about the institution. So the University of the West Indies, UWI, as we refer to it, is the largest and longest established provider of higher education in the Caribbean region. It was established in 1948 under charter as the then University College of the West Indies. Now, decades later, more than 45,000 students. We have approximately 9,000 graduates per year and more than 120,000 alumni. The programs of the university are offered across 5 campuses. So we have campuses in Barbados, Jamaica, where we're situated, Trinidad and Tobago, and our newest campus in Antigua. So these 4 are the physical campuses. And then we have our 5th, the open campus, through which many of our distance education programs are offered. Now, what about the School of Education, which is the specific department or school within which our case study is situated? So the School of Education, and we're speaking specifically here to the Mona campus because there are schools of education in Barbados and Trinidad, for instance, outlines its vision as follows. Firstly, to prepare educators for national and regional education systems. So remember that it is a regional institution. Secondly, to conduct research on educational issues and concerns and provide data to inform the educational decision-making process. So again, it's very much evidence-based when it comes to decision-making. Providing leadership in institutional development and program quality to education systems. We offer a range of program offerings at various levels, so the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. And these cover a range of specializations. And when we speak to the case study in more detail, you'll get an idea of some of these specializations. And as I said previously, through various modalities, face-to-face, online, blended. We seek to prepare both pre as well as in-service teachers at all levels of the education system. And of course, we're involved in research, and we're very much involved in outreach and public service to our surrounding communities, as well as the wider nation and regional partners as well. All right, so how does our case study connect to SDG 4 goals and target outcomes? So we have a chart here. I'm not sure if you're able to read it very well. We had to scale it down to fit the slide, but just to give you an idea of some of what we are involved in. So one of the things that we engage in is awareness raising with respect to sustainable development, education for sustainable development, and the sustainable development goals. So we have this, for instance, through in-house seminars, as well as seminars that engage wider audiences. We also facilitate guest lecturers, those involved in those different areas, SD, ESD, and the SDGs, in our undergraduate and postgraduate classes. So those connect with target 4.7. We seek to infuse SD, ESD, the SDGs into our teaching programs. And most recently, we have developed, and we're currently delivering with our first cohort of students, a Master's of Education program in Education for Sustainable Development, Global Citizenship, and Peace. Yes, I know it is a mouthful. So again, those connect with target 4.7. We have outreach programs such as Change from Within. So this is a school-based program implemented by the School of Education that seeks to address violence within schools. So we work to change the school culture, and we're currently working with 12 primary and secondary schools. In addition, we train pre-service teachers so that they have the knowledge, the content knowledge, and the pedagogical skills as they enter into the education sector. and we offer professional development for our in-service teachers. We have various modalities for our program delivery. And then I had said that we would share some of our specializations at the higher education level. So we have programs, for instance, in higher educational management, in educational policy and planning, in curriculum and instruction, in early childhood education, language and literacy, mathematics education, and technical and vocational education and training and workforce development. And so you can see that we've listed there the various SDG outcome targets to which they relate, 4.3, 4.7, 4.2, and so forth. Some are cross-cutting, such as educational policy and planning. We also engage in a series of partnerships. So we have partnerships with our National Ministry of Education. So that's critical for us. We have formed within the School of Education an Education for Sustainable Development Working Group. So I coordinate that. Dr. Roofe is a member, and we have other members from various specializations within the School of Education. And again, the intent is to infuse and continue infusing SD, ESD, and SDGs into our courses and programs, and also to carry out research to inform these various processes. We collaborate. So we collaborate with universities in England, Latvia, the USA, as some examples. And we've been undertaking research on ESD infusion, research on assessment for ESD, research on global competencies. So those are some of the areas in which we're involved in research, both within the School of Education and as part of these partnerships with these universities. And then I had mentioned previously Change from Within, the program geared at addressing violence in schools. We have other programs as well. And again, we've just identified a few of them because we cannot give an exhaustive list. So Insights is one example. This is a program that looks at children's temperaments and gaining an understanding of that for teachers, for parents, for children themselves, and how those might affect particular behaviors and reactions in the classrooms. And then SOCATE, our program that looks at exceptionalities across the continuum and how to address students and cater for students with different exceptionalities, as we term them. So that is just an example of some of what we at the School of Education are involved with, and again, some of the SDG 4 targets to which they connect. So I now turn back over to Dr. Roofe.
So as we have looked at the range of things that we believe higher education institutions should be doing, we propose a framework, and this framework is really based on what we consider to be critical and deliberate actions for higher education institutions to achieve SDG 4 targets. You will notice in the framework on the slide that really everything hinges on higher education institutions' understanding of sustainable development, ESD, SDGs, etc., and an involvement of stakeholder partnership. So I'll share with you how we have understood this framework that we are proposing. So the articulation of this framework begins with really a call for higher education institutions to discern a deep understanding of SDG 4 in light of their roles as higher education institutions. This is not simply limited to the role they are expected to play, as indicated in SDG 4.3, but their role as institutions that exist to prepare individuals for the future who will problem solve and innovate. Integral here is the SDG literacy of all categories of staff. Such an understanding will allow higher education institutions to lead and initiate SDG 4 related activities without being mandated by some authority. Once this consciousness is developed, each institution within each country then needs to localize this understanding in light of their local population, programs they seek to offer, the geopolitical context, and amidst the socioeconomic context within which they operate. This, of course, requires stakeholder participation to ensure accurate and appropriate interpretation of understanding, and to ensure representation in decision-making and inclusiveness amidst diversity. Higher education institutions will need to converse with those within as well as those outside their institutions, and those who govern and practice at both lower and higher levels of the education landscape. Since higher education institutions have the critical role of developing new knowledge, training individuals, and developing those who will conduct the training, they must provide flexible and accessible training programs. These programs should be developed based on the types of citizens needed for the society. Where necessary, these institutions must demonstrate willingness to offer newer types of programs and newer types of qualifications. These programs should not be an end in themselves, but should have a coordinated effect so that once completed, regardless of where completed, individuals can articulate to other areas without difficulty. Embedded in this element of the framework is a call to higher education institutions to be more flexible in what programs are developed, how these are developed, and how these are offered. Importantly, this dimension of the framework requires attention to issues of diversity as it relates to meeting gender needs, subject area needs, cultural needs, racial needs, thereby making education and training the equalizer that it is intended to be. To support some of these activities that are mentioned for program development and training, etc., collaborative partnerships are needed between individuals within and outside higher education, within and across disciplines, and within and across countries, as I suppose we're having this morning in Jamaica and afternoon in Ireland. This is necessary to attain education's quality and to increase access. However, regardless of the type of collaboration established, deliberate efforts must be made at ensuring balancing of power between and among collaborators. Balancing of power can be achieved when a mutual relationship of trust is built. This can be built through equal sharing of learning and support. And of course, we know that technology then is a useful tool in allowing for collaboration across cultures and time zones. But for this to be effective, respect and valuing of each culture should underpin this sharing and learning. Now, research as articulated in the framework is necessary to develop strategies and guide efforts or actions. For example, research must be undertaken to help discern the understanding of SDG 4, to provide the most appropriate training, to derive collaborators, and to monitor progress on policies and practices and actions that were established. In other words, research is a driver of what we are proposing here to achieve SDG 4. And amidst all of that, it is expected that once we undertake these actions, then the effect will be in the types and the kinds of citizens that we have. Citizens who are knowledgeable about sustainable development, education for sustainable development, the SDGs, and citizens who are able to act in support of sustainable development. Now, on the next slide, what we have here is a mapping of the SDG 4 targets and the activities that we have undertaken as a higher education institution. So the programs and activities that Therese mentioned early, we have mapped them here with the different targets. But as we have mapped them to individual targets, one of the things that we recognize is that the achievement of one target is dependent on the achievement of another. So while we seek to map the activities here on the slide, I hope you can see that these activities are interrelated, and so are interrelated as it relates to the targets. So we close by saying to us and all of those who are listening that the achievement of SDG 4 outcomes is important for everyone to ensure harmony between people and planet and to secure an excellent future for generations to come. Deliberate and coordinated efforts within and across country contexts are needed to attain success in higher education in achieving SDG 4. And of course, higher education institutions must be more deliberate about their role of advocacy to agitate for themselves, those who they serve, and those who reside in sectors outside of higher education institutions. So higher education institutions should lead by example and ensure that classrooms and campuses, as we have shared in our case study today become practice and theory alive, where they are living laboratories for sustainability. So I hope that's something that we have shared here today would inspire other higher education institutions to carry out their role towards achieving SDG 4 targets. Back to you, Therese.
I think that is our conclusion. That is our, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ferguson, Dr. Roofe, for that very, very informative and insightful presentation. So if it's okay and we have a little bit of time for some questions, let's kick off with some questions that we've gathered through the presentation. And in no particular order, but going back to, and I'll leave it to, for now, for either of you to answer. Earlier on in the presentation, you spoke about both the importance of SDG 4, but also its interdependence with the delivery of all Sustainable Development Goals. So could you just expand on this a little bit more, and should other goals be in the thinking as HEIs focus on SDG 4?
Okay, thank you for that question. So what we meant when we spoke about that interdependency. So for instance, if you think about some of the other sustainable development goals. So as one example, we can speak to Sustainable Development Goal 13, which looks at climate action. So climate action involves a range of means and mechanisms, but of course, climate change education is going to be a critical aspect of that. You know, individuals need to know what is climate change. It doesn't have to be anything in depth with respect to the science of climate change, but there needs to be a general awareness. What is climate change? I'm losing my voice. What are some of its impacts? What are its causes? How are we affected? How is the global community affected? And so education becomes critical in terms of raising awareness about climate change, instilling the skills and the values that are needed to address climate change, and bringing about that individual level behavior change, as well as change in industry and in sectors, other sectors as well. So that's just one example in relation to how education maps onto the other Sustainable Development Goals. We could speak about Sustainable Development Goal 16 as another example, which is looking at peace, justice, institutions. So again, education plays a part in that. If you think about conflict resolution, if you think about peace education. So just two examples there. So the other part of the question that you raised, do these other sustainable development goals then need to map into the framework? Definitely, for higher education institutions, it has to touch on and address each of the sustainable development goals. Those have to be at the forefront of their thinking.
And Dr. Roofe, thank you for that, Dr. Ferguson. Dr. Roofe, if I could give you the next question, which is focusing back on the sectoral challenges and the importance of getting over silo thinking or silo operation across the sector. The question is more about within the HEIs themselves. Do you have any observations around silo thinking, and what can individual institutes do within their own context around harnessing their efforts to get to grips with the delivery of SDG 4?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Joe, because the interrelatedness is not just about, other sectors outside, but as you have rightly said, within the institutions themselves. And so we spoke this about the targeted approach that is needed. So within higher education institutions, we tend to operate within faculties or within departments, right? So we are looking for cross-disciplinary collaborations to happen as well to help meet some of these targets. When we listen to the number of targets there are, and we may feel overwhelmed that because no one department, no one faculty, depending on how the institution is organized, can achieve all the targets. So interdisciplinary collaboration is definitely necessary. So we need to coordinate across disciplines, across faculties. We also need to coordinate with junior faculty and more of those, and faculties being used here in another way. When we have junior staff and those staff members who are more experienced, we need that kind of collaboration. So to respond more definitively, yes, in higher education itself, we tend to operate in silos. But what SDG is calling us to do, and in particular, as we talk about SDG 4, is to reduce those boundaries even within our own institutions and to collaborate with others who are in other subject areas, to plan programs, to offer workshops, to offer seminars, etc.
Thank you, Dr. Roofe. And the next question touches on the same theme, so we'll stay with you at least. It's a two-part question. So the first part to Dr. Roofe, the second part to Dr. Ferguson. The first part is within UWI, was there anything, the first part is about leadership. How has the leadership model within UWI been adapted or flexed to take on your approach to SDG 4? So leadership within your college itself around the delivery of this goal. And the second part of the question, which I'll ask you, Dr. Ferguson, is within the framework, within your framework, which the respondent has said is very impressive. Is there any particular intervention that you focused on that has been the most impactful?
And so I think my response is going to connect directly with what Therese will talk about. So before being at the UWI Mona within the School of Education, we have been really undertaking and making, undertaking activities to increase awareness for, sustainable development. So across the campus, Mona campus in particular, there are different units that address different things. But within the School of Education, what we have done deliberately is to undertake the research in a way that will help us to gradually influence the wider leadership. So I think on the campus, you will see containers regarding how you should store your garbage, etc. So we have that there. So what I would say is that it's not at the level that we would want it to be from a general leadership perspective. But indeed, there are efforts and there are elements of, the leadership undertaking this based on the fact that even across the campus, you can see once you come on campus, some elements of, attention to matters of sustainable development. And I'll allow Dr. Ferguson just to talk about how we have deliberately attempted to infuse the sustainable development in what we do as a means of a model for other teacher education institutions, because we belong to the School of Education where our emphasis is on teacher education in a large part. And then hopefully that will catapult to others. So Therese, I'll just hand over to you for that.
All right, thank you, Carmel. So I think the initiative that Carmel is referring to is a collaborative action research project of the ESD working group, correct, Carmel? Yes, right. So within the ESD working group, as I had explained, we have 9 or 10 individuals across different specializations within the school. Some of these individuals, yes, have a familiarity with sustainable development, with ESD, with the SDGs. Some have no familiarity at all. And so what we have been doing over the past year, we have engaged in this collaborative action research project to build awareness amongst ourselves and to also infuse ESD into the various courses that we're delivering. So these could be courses at the postgraduate level or at the undergraduate level. We've left it up to each individual to select that particular course. And we've engaged in this collaborative, reflective process. So it's been collaboration from conceptualization through to implementation, through to reflection, analyzing the data, which includes our own reflective processes, and disseminating the data. And we have just started sharing that. We hope to share it at some point with the wider School of Education, those who are not a member of the ESD working group. In fact, we did start that process last year, but that was at kind of the very beginning of it, or midway point. So we want to do a more fulsome sharing of what has taken place. And then hopefully as well, the wider campus community, because as my colleague said, the SDGs, sustainable development, this is something that is multi and interdisciplinary in nature. So it cannot just reside within a school of education. It has to go into the humanities, into the social sciences, into the natural sciences, and so forth. So that's just an example. And I think the question you had asked me to address, you were, I think, querying whether within the framework that we have presented, whether there's a particular intervention that has been most impactful. Well, for me, I think all of it has been impactful, particularly the aspects of program development and training, the collaborative partnerships, and the research. So this is something, and I want to make it clear that this predates us as well. So I don't want to give the impression that, we are the ones spearheading this. There have been exemplary individuals within the School of Education before our time, before we joined, who have been spearheading this effort. And so the process to incorporate sustainable development and ESD into courses, that began before us. And so we have a number of courses where it is very strongly embedded. And now with our collaborative action research project, we're building on that. And what we're seeing is that that is not only building students' capacity, but it's building our own capacity as teacher educators, and that's critical. This is something that we can do each successive academic year, and it's something that our students can hopefully do when they go into their own schools and their own classrooms. So that aspect of the framework, the program development and training, is critical. The teaching, that's critical. The partnerships are critical. So as we said, we partner with entities such as the Ministry of Education, the National College of Educational Leadership, but we're also partnering with other universities in Latvia, in England, in the USA with respect to teaching and research. And again, that is serving to broaden our own horizon. So just to give an example, the partnership that we have begun to develop with our university in Latvia, they're learning about some of our sustainability issues. We're learning about some of their sustainability issues and challenges. That will become even more embedded when we actually have a physical exchange that has unfortunately been postponed due to the pandemic. But we can just imagine what that will do in fostering our own individual competencies, our localized understandings, as well as our globalized understandings. So those partnerships are critical. And then the research. So the research it's foundational to everything. The research is what informs our teaching. The research is what informs, efforts to influence decision-making and policy-making. So I don't think I can say that one element is most impactful, because we've been engaging with the different aspects and for ourselves, and we can only speak for ourselves, our own capacities are being strengthened and emboldened.
It's very interesting that the whole framework is every component part is as important as each other. And I want to bring you back just to one theme around collaboration. Just before I do that, we're heading towards the end, but please do send your questions in. We have another few minutes. So I'm going to parcel together two questions here around collaboration. One question is about collaboration with the secondary education sector in terms of the promotion of SDG 4 and the advancement of students from secondary to higher education, and any thoughts you might have in that regard, in terms of the role of higher education institutes to promote that aspect of it. And the second question is about collaboration with technology outside the university, technological assistance outside the university in the area of innovation. If you had any thoughts in that area as well.
Carmel, do you want to take the one on secondary education, and I will attempt the one on technology?
Okay, Therese. I thought you would have spoken about the work with the principals, in these schools, where we collaborate with principals to help improve values and attitudes of their population. So it's not just working with the principals in silo, but the principals who lead schools with students who are in inner city areas, for example, who would want to see behavior change so we have that kind of partnership. I think there's also the other partnership which I think we really could improve on, and that is in the area of technical vocational education, where we now have a national TVET policy which says that all secondary school students should pursue a technical vocational education subject. And that is with the view to help improve the quality of life, their ability to earn, etc., when they're through with schooling. And so I think this is an area that we ourselves could expand a little more and include and improve the partnership with schools. But through our teaching practice, which is normal, right, or practical opportunities, when our student teachers go into these schools, we also partner with the teachers and offer training to the teachers themselves while our students are there, and then invite back in, you know, at the end of it for principals, vice principals, student teacher supervisors to come in, and we have seminars with them. But I think I would say commit to the fact that I think this is an area in which we could really do some more work to expand the reach across the country.
Okay. All right. So in terms of the aspect of technology and technological innovation, so I don't want to make a blanket statement, but my understanding would be that other aspects, other faculties within the university are indeed engaging in those sorts of partnerships and initiatives, you know, whether it's university or university and, you know, particular sectors of society. So I wouldn't speak to that element. In terms of the School of Education specifically, so again, from our perspective, we are engaging with the Faculty of Science and Technology. So just to give an example, there are persons within the School of Education who are working with the Faculty of Science and Technology in the area of climate change and trying to address issues of climate change education. They're actually working on the development of a climate change text. So that multi and interdisciplinary aspect is there in terms of the education, science and technology link. In addition to that, and just that probably the level of awareness raising. So in the Masters of Education program that I mentioned, the MEd and ESD, one of the courses within that program is climate change education. So again, we have individuals from the Faculty of Science and Technology, as well as the Institute of Sustainable Development, who have offered and delivered guest lectures as part of that course specifically. One of our field trips, quote unquote, or field excursions for the course involves students actually going to the net zero energy building on campus to see what that building is about and how energy plays a role in climate change, and what this building and what it represents as a model, how that is trying to address energy issues on the campus and extend it to the wider society. So those are just some examples. They may not be the examples that the person who posed the question, you know, was looking for, but I hope that at least gives some insight.
Dr. Roofe, Dr. Ferguson, thank you very much for joining us here today. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. I'm sure all of our participants found it as interesting and informative as I did as a layperson. Thank you to everybody who tuned in today. For those of you interested, SDG 5, Gender Equality, we'll be presenting that next week on November the 18th as part of our Transform, Startup and Scale Up event. So we'll be circulating a new registration link from the Business School on all of our channels for anyone who wants to listen in on that. For those of you interested in the Transform event in an overall sense, this runs from November the 16th to the 20th and discusses the role of digital technologies for startup and scale-up companies. You'll find the registration link online and through our social media channels. So that's about it from us for today. Thank you again, doctors. It's clear that not only do you talk the talk, you walk the walk with your subject matter. Thank you for all who participated. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and thanks again for joining. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.